At 2 in the morning, Elena received a call from the sheriff. Her parents were sitting in her Lake Tahoe home, claiming she had illegally cut off their power and water. But Elena didn't panic. She calmly looked at the federal warrant on her desk and smiled. For 6 years, her family had treated her like a walking bank, demanding mortgage payments, wedding bills, emergency cash, and silent obedience. But this time, they had gone too far. They didn't just ask for help. They forged documents, stole property, and walked straight into a trap.
I am 34-year-old Elena. The phone rang at 2 in the morning. I was in my high-rise office downtown, gazing at city lights with glass of Saint's caller ID. The caller ID? El Dorado County Sheriff, a gruff officer told my parents. Martha and Arthur filed a harassment report. They claimed I cut the power and water at the Lake Tahoe home they were occupying. The officer demanded I turn them back on, claiming my parents had squatter rights. I took a slow sip, staring at the legal documents on my desk. Right there was a federal arrest warrant from the feds. I smiled at the phone, my voice ice, cold and polite. That is fine, officer. Let them sit in the dark. Tomorrow morning, federal prison will give them free housing and all the utilities they could ever need. Before I reveal how my own parents tried to scam me and landed in federal custody, let me know where you are watching from. Hit subscribe if you have dealt with toxic family members who treat you like a walking bank. You will want to see how this trap snaps shut. To see how my parents ended up freezing while the feds closed in, look back 2 months to a lush estate near the city. It was the wedding day of my sister, Chloe. At 28, Chloe was a shallow influencer who cared more about her online aesthetic than reality. She was marrying Julian, a smooth-talking guy claiming to be a tech mogul. His crypto ventures sounded like total scams to anyone with actual financial sense. As a wealth management lead, I was expected to quietly fund their fake lifestyle. The reception was drowning in white lilies and champagne towers. I was near the ice sculpture when my mother, Martha, rushed over, looking frantic. She dragged me into a hallway and whispered that my father's card was declined for the catering bill. The caterers were threatening to pull the food before dinner. Without blinking, I handed over my own card for the $25,000 invoice. I had been bailing them out for 6 years, so saving the family image was just another day. I went back to my table, waiting for a thank you that never came. The real circus started when my father stepped up to the mic. The champagne tower shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. I stood by a massive floral display, mentally calculating the bill. As a consultant, I value investments for a living. Looking around this estate, I saw a Terrell investment posing as a wedding. My sister was holding court by the ice sculpture in a custom cramped dress that cost more than luxury sedan, snapping photos for her followers. Her new husband Julian stood nearby, laughing loudly. He told everyone he was a tech CEO. When asked what his company actually did, he spit out buzzwords like blockchain and decentralized finance. I had run a background check on his firm last month. It was an empty shell registered to a P.O. box. I checked my watch, desperate to leave. I had stayed near the exits to avoid the crowd, but in my family, staying out of the way never meant staying out of the wallet. Martha suddenly appeared beside me. Her makeup was streaked, and she clutched her purse so hard her knuckles turned white. She grabbed my arm and hauled me toward the service corridor. "Caroline, we have a huge emergency," she hissed. I pulled away, smoothing my dress. "What kind of emergency?" Before she could answer, my father Arthur appeared. He was followed by a man with a tablet who looked completely annoyed. It was the head caterer. Arthur wiped his brow, giving me his signature fake panic look. "Caroline, thank God." A mix-up with the bank. My card was flagged for fraud due to high volume today. The account is frozen, and this gentleman says he needs payment now or he pulls the dinner. I looked at the caterer. "What is the balance?" $25,000. The caterer said, voice flat, "Per the contract, the payment must clear before service. I have 5 minutes before we start clearing the kitchen." I stared at them. "You told me this wedding was paid off weeks ago." "We thought it was," Martha said, her voice climbing. "There were overages. The flowers, the premium bar Julian requested. We cannot let them pull the food, Caroline. Julian has family here from Atlanta who flew first class. We will look like peasants if the staff packs up the steak." "Is a temporary hold," Arthur added, patting my shoulder. "You know how banks are. Put it on your card. I will wire the money Monday. I looked at him, knowing exactly what a maxed out limit looks like. There was no fraud alert. They were broke. They authorized upgrades they could not afford to keep up the facade of wealth. I am not paying $25,000 for this, I said, keeping my voice firm. Figure it out. Tell Chloe to use her wedding gift money. Martha gasped, grabbing my wrist again. You cannot do this to your sister. It is her special day. Do you want to humiliate us in front of Julian S. parents? If the food stops, everyone will know we are poor. You are poor, I said coldly. I am not, please, Caroline. Arthur pleaded, leaning in. Do this one thing. We have done so much for you. We are family. If you do not pay, Chloe will be crushed. You make enough to cover a temporary charge. They had perfected this routine. The manufactured crisis. The loyalty trip, the desperate plea, and the manipulation. I stood in that hallway, hearing the band play in the ballroom. I thought about the mortgage payments I had made for them for 6 years. I thought about the thousands I had funneled into their accounts while they praised Julian's fake business. If I left, the wedding would fall apart. Chloe would throw a fit, and my parents would spend years blaming me for ruining the reputation. I did not want the drama. I just wanted the night over so I could return to my quiet life. I opened my purse and pulled out my corporate card. I handed it to the caterer. Ignore my parents. Run it, I said, my voice dead. The caterer swiped the card and waited for the beep. He handed it back with a nod. Payment approved. We start dinner now, he said, turning toward the kitchen. The moment he left, Martha let out a huge sigh. Thank heavens, you are a lifesaver. Arthur straightened his tie, his posture shifting from desperate to arrogant. See? Minor speed bump. I will get that money back to you next week. Do not worry about it. I slid the card back into my wallet, knowing I would never see a cent of that $25,000 again. I said nothing. I just looked at them, accepting that this was just an extortion fee to keep my peace. Come on, Brenda whispered, latching onto my father. We need to reach the head table before speeches start. They hurried toward the ballroom, leaving me in the hallway. I took a breath, smoothing my dress. The ransom was paid, crisis averted. I figured I would just endure the dinner, listen to the speeches, then head home to my apartment for a quiet night. I walked inside and sat at a table far from the stage. The lights dimmed, and the band struck up a fanfare. I watched my father march to the stage, grabbing the mic. He tapped it twice, flashing that trademark grin. I sipped my water, bracing for some generic toast about love. I had no idea the real betrayal of the century was about to drop. The room went dead silent as he cleared his throat. He stood under the chandeliers, radiating the fake humility he had perfected over decades. He hoisted his glass, commanding the room. Family is not just a word to Brenda and me, he began, his voice booming through the sound system. It is an action, a lifelong commitment. When we look at Sarah and Mark today, we see the future. 2 brilliant people ready to conquer the world. I took a slow sip of water. My heart rate stayed steady. But my mind started tallying the lies. Mark, my boy, he continued, turning to the table. You are a genius, a tech founder who will change finance forever. We could not be prouder to have you. Mark stood up, hand on his heart, giving a modest bow that looked entirely rehearsed. The crowd murmured in adoration. Starting life needs a solid foundation, my father said, his tone growing grandiose. Brenda and I know how brutal the housing market is for young couples today. The economy is harsh. We believe a parent's duty is to help their children start on solid ground. He paused for effect. I watched my mother dab her eye with a silk tissue, careful not to ruin her makeup. For 30 years, our suburban home has been our sanctuary, he announced, voice thick with fake emotion. It is where Sarah took her first steps, where we celebrated birthdays and triumphs. But a house is just bricks until a family fills it with love. Brenda and I decided it is time for a new generation to make their own memories there. The ballroom grew perfectly still. People leaned in, waiting for the big moment. Sarah and Mark. Thomas smiled, projecting his voice to the back. As your wedding gift, Brenda and I are signing over the deed to the family home, fully paid off. An $800,000 estate to start your new life without a single financial worry. For a split second, the room was so quiet I heard the hum of the air conditioning. Then, absolute chaos erupted. The crowd exploded into a standing ovation. People were cheering, clapping, whistling. Some of Mark's relatives were actually jumping up and down, praising my parents' generosity. On stage, the performance hit its peak. Sarah burst in dramatic tears, hiding her face in her hands before throwing her arms around my father's neck. Mark rushed in, grabbing Thomas in a fierce, masculine hug. He then pulled my mother close, burying his face in her shoulder. Playing the role of the moved son-in-law perfectly, I sat frozen at table 42. My ice water was sweating, dripping onto my fingertips. My brain, trained for years of financial analysis, suddenly short-circuited. A fully paid-off house. The words bounced around my skull like physical blows. My parents were not rich. They had not been rich for a long time. 6 years ago, Thomas made some catastrophic investments that wiped out their savings. They were 60 days away from foreclosure. Brenda had called me sobbing, threatening to end it all if they lost their social status. They begged me for a bailout. As a wealth management consultant, I knew it was a terrible deal, but they were my parents. I stepped in. For 72 months straight, I wired $3,500 from my account to their lender. I paid the taxes. I paid the maintenance when the roof leaked. I sacrificed my own investments to keep a roof over their heads I personally poured over $250,000 into that property to stop an auction. And less than 20 minutes ago, my mother grabbed my arm in that hallway. Sweating with panic, because they did not have $25,000 to cover the food these guests were eating. Yet, here they were, accepting applause for giving away an $800,000 estate. An estate they did not even own. An estate they only lived in because I was quietly bleeding my bank account dry every single month to keep the bank away. They were handing my life's work to an arrogant influencer, and a grifter as a wedding gift. My breathing grew shallow, but my face stayed blank. I watched the fluent guest wipe away tears at this display of parental love. Mark raised his glass, soaking in the fame. He looked like a man who just won the lottery without buying a ticket. I slowly set my glass on the white tablecloth. The ovation finally settled as people took their seats, chatting about the historic gift. I stared at the head table. Brenda was beaming, waving at friends. Then her eyes flicked toward the shadows. She found me sitting alone. For a fraction of a second, the smile vanished. She saw my expression. She knew exactly what I was calculating. Brenda quickly looked away, grabbed her champagne, and turned her back to me to engage Mark in conversation. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, that it bypassed anger entirely and settled into a state of absolute, icy clarity. They used me as a silent ATM for survival, only to flip that asset to buy the admiration of strangers and secure the loyalty of a golden child who never worked a day in her life. I grabbed my clutch and stood. The main course was coming, but I had lost my appetite. I walked out, my heels clicking softly on the marble. No screaming, no scene. I would wait for them in the bridal suite. The room smelled of hairspray and lilies. I sat in a high-backed chair in the corner, waiting. The distant bass from the ballroom vibrated through the floorboards. I checked my watch. 11:05. The speeches were done. The cake was cut. The bride and groom would come up here soon to change for their exit. It did not take long. The heavy door swung open. Laughter spilled into the room. Sarah walked in first, holding her massive gown. Mark followed, carrying a champagne bottle. My parents brought up the rear. Brenda was fixing her hair. Thomas was unbuttoning his jacket. They were still riding the high of their performance. "Oh, my feet are killing me," Sarah complained, kicking off her heels. But did you hear that crowd? Everyone will be talking about this wedding for years." It was the perfect announcement. "Sweetheart," Brenda said, beaming. "Your father delivered it beautifully. You two are set for life." I cleared my throat. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. 4 heads snapped in my direction. They had not noticed me in the shadows. The laughter evaporated. The shift in their body language was fascinating to watch. Thomas stiffened. Brenda's fake smile hardened into thin, white line. Stephanie rolled her eyes, arms crossed. Donovan looked annoyed his moment was ruined. Thomas dropped his charm. "Caroline, what are you doing here? You should be mingling." I stood up, grabbing my clutch. "I am not staying for the exit. I came to clear up a few things about your gift." Brenda stepped between us. "Do not bring your drama to your sister's suite. It is her night. I am thrilled for her," I lied flatly. "I am just curious about the math. You told 300 people you were gifting an $800,000 estate, debt-free. Generational wealth, Donovan added, chugging champagne. It is about building a foundation. You work in wealth management, you should understand leverage. We are using that equity to scale my new platform. A power move for the family. He sounded like a walking podcast of financial buzzwords. He had no clue how the world works. Real wealth requires actual assets to pass down, I said. I looked at my father. You do not own that house, Thomas. You have not owned it in 6 years. Keep it down, he hissed, glancing at hallway. People will hear. Let them, I replied. I want Stephanie and Donovan to know exactly what they are inheriting. They are getting a massive mortgage. A mortgage I have been paying. Stephanie sighed. Why do you always make this about you? Mom and Dad gave us the house. Why can you not just be happy for us? Why the jealousy? Jealous? The word tasted like ash. Stephanie, I have wired $3,500 every month for 6 years. I pay property taxes. I dropped $10,000 when the furnace died. I bought the new roof. I saved our parents from foreclosure while they bought you luxury handbags. You are wearing a dress that costs a year's salary and call you jealous? Brenda glared. You make a fortune? Caroline. Do not act like you are broke. Helping family is what you do. You do not want support, I said. You want a sponsor. You even made me pay $25,000 for the catering because you blew your money on appearances. We will pay you back. Thomas barked, his face flushing. It was a cash flow issue. It was a cash flow issue. I am not talking about the food, I said coldly. I am talking about the house. I am done. I am canceling the mortgage auto, draft, the property tax escrow, and every merchant credit card you have been using. If Donovan is such a tech genius, he can cover the monthly payment. Welcome to home ownership, Stephanie. She stared at me, then at Donovan in panic. The champagne bottle lower from his lips. Wait, what mortgage? Thomas said the house was paid off. He promised $800,000 equity. He lied to you. I said. I turned to leave, ready to walk away forever. I had drawn my line. But my mother was not done. Brenda let out a mocking laugh that echoed off the mirrored walls. Cancel the payments, she sneered. Go ahead, Caroline. Cut us off. We do not care. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and looked back. You do not care? The bank will foreclose in 90 days if the payments stop. You will be on the street. No, we will not, Brenda smiled. It was the look of a predator. We do not need your money. You think you are smart with your spreadsheets, but you do not control us. Thomas looked smug. Your mother is right. Stop paying. It is not our problem anymore. What are you talking about? I demanded. Brenda leaned in, voice dripping with triumph. I went to the county clerk. I finished the deed transfer last week. Stephanie is the sole legal owner now. We gave it to her free and clear. My mind raced. That is legally impossible. With an active mortgage, the due on sale clause would trigger. I kept my voice steady. The bank will demand the full balance immediately. Oh, please, Donovan scoffed. You are trying to scare us. Lawyers handle transfers all the time. The bank does not care as long as some pays. And someone will keep paying, Brenda said, staring into my eyes. Because if it goes into foreclosure, it destroys the credit of whoever is on the loan. My mother's audacity hit me like a train. She transferred the house to Stephanie but left the massive debt on my parents' names, expecting me to keep paying. They expected me to keep funding a house that now belonged to my spoiled sister and her husband. They stole the asset and left me with the liability, hoping I would not let them go bankrupt. Stephanie smirked, adjusting her tiara. Thanks for the house, Caroline. We will invite you over for pool parties. I looked at the four of them, the coward, the brat, the leech, and the master manipulator. I could have screamed, but I did not. I am a consultant. I deal with hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. When your enemy makes a catastrophic mistake, you do not warn them. You let them dig their own grave. Brenda thought she was a genius for filing that deed, but she had no idea what kind of legal trap she just walked into. She did not know what I knew about the specific details of that property title. The silence in the room was heavy. They were waiting for me to explode. Instead, I smoothed my dress and looked at my mother with the cold detachment of a mortician. Enjoy the house, Stephanie, I said. My voice was calm and final. I turned the brass knob, opened the door, and stepped out of the suite. Caroline, wait! Thomas called out, his voice wavering. My lack of reaction had clearly unsettled him. I did not stop. I did not look back. I walked down the hall, descended the grand staircase, and exited the estate. The night air was crisp. I handed my ticket to the valet, waited in silence, and climbed in my car. I pulled away, leaving the lights behind. Driving down the dark highway back to Chicago, I reached for my phone. I did not call my parents. I did not text my sister. I opened my contacts and blocked every single one of them. I blocked my sister, my parents, and every aunt and uncle who cheered for them. They wanted to commit fraud to fund their delusions. Fine. They thought they had won. They had no idea I was about to let them legally destroy them. 2 months of blissful silence followed. No frantic texts about overdrawn accounts. No random charges for luxury goods. I had finally severed the financial umbilical cord that kept them afloat for the last 6 years. I canceled the mortgage auto, draft and directed my tax escrow. I blocked every trace of my family from my phone and social media. My life in Chicago went back to peak efficiency. I closed a huge merger and enjoyed peaceful nights in my penthouse. I watched my wealth grow without my family's endless fake crises draining me. But I knew the quiet was fleeting, delusion never lasts, and the bill always arrives. The drama hit on a rainy Tuesday. I was at my desk reviewing a portfolio when my office line buzzed. Almost nobody had direct line. I picked up expecting a client, but my mother's trembling voice hit my ear instead. "Caroline, please, do not hang up. I had to call your office since you blocked my cell. We are in a total nightmare." I leaned back in my leather chair, dead silent. I just let her panic hang there. "Are you there?" Brenda sobbed. Her voice lacked its usual country club polish. This was pure, desperate fear. "Your father and I have nowhere to go. We are sitting in a motel parking lot, and our credit cards are getting declined. You have to help us." I kept my voice perfectly flat. "What happened to your $800,000 estate, Brenda? I thought you gave it to the golden couple for their generational wealth. Surely they have room for you in that mansion?" A bitter sob broke out. "Stephanie and Donovan kicked us out, Caroline. They changed the locks this morning. The predictability was almost funny. How do you get evicted from a house you just gave away?" Thomas grabbed the phone, his voice gruff and panicked. "Caroline, this is no joke. Donovan manipulated your sisters. He told Stephanie our presence was stifling his CEO creative process. He claimed he needed the whole first floor for a crypto server farm." Stephanie took his side. She said our furniture ruined the aesthetic for her sponsored videos. They packed our clothes in garbage bags and dumped them on the porch. So, the tech visionary needed a server farm, and the influencer need a better backdrop. I spun my silver pen, savoring the irony. They took your asset and trashed the liability. Sounds like a smart business move by Donovan. It is exactly what you taught Stephanie to do. This is your fault, Thomas snapped, his temper rising. If you had kept paying the mortgage, they would not be so stressed. Donovan said the bank has been sending letters. The stress is make him act out. I stopped spinning the pen. The bank is writing because the mortgage is in your name, Thomas. Donovan and Stephanie do not care about foreclosure because their credit is not tied to it. You handed them the deed but kept the debt. You built your own trap. We made a mistake, Brenda cried, grabbing the phone. We were foolish. We thought we were securing Stephanie's future. But they treated us like unwanted tenants. They threw us away. Our savings are gone because we paid for that wedding. You paid for the wedding, I corrected sharply. I paid for the house. And you gave my investment to a scam artist. We need a place to stay, Thomas interrupted, ignore her tears. We can't stay in a motel, Caroline. We need your Lake Tahoe house. I paused to make sure I heard him right. You want my vacation home? It is empty, Thomas insisted. We know you barely use it. It is massive. We will stay there until we legally reclaim our house from Donovan. You owe us, Caroline. We are your parents. You cannot put us on the street. I glanced at the framed photo of the Tahoe place on my desk. It was a gorgeous multi-million-dollar cabin, glass walls facing the water. It was my sanctuary, my private property. The idea of them polluting that space was impossible. Listen clearly, I said, my voice turning icy. You treated me like a bank for 6 years, shamed me at a wedding, gave my sacrifice to your favorite child, and now you want my vacation home? Caroline, please, Brenda begged. We are family. Family and loyalties at the wedding. I am not your safety net at the wedding. I am not your safety net anymore. If you do not give us the access code, I will ruin you, Thomas threatened, his voice turning vicious. I will call your firm. I will tell them how you abuse your parents. I will make a scene. I smiled, knowing my line was recording every word. You can try, Thomas, but the answer is no. You will not step foot on my property. You will not get a cent. You made your bed with Donovan and Stephanie. Sleep in the parking lot. I hung up. The silence was perfect. They were broke, homeless, and betrayed by the people they had sacrificed everything to please. It was classic karma. But looking at the Chicago skyline, I knew my father's pride would never accept a loss. Thomas felt entitled to everything I owned, and my refusal would just make him desperate. I knew they would try to force their way into Tahoe House anyway. I prepared for it. The notification hit 3 days later on a Friday night. I was relaxing on my velvet sofa, checking a quarterly earnings report. The alert on my screen was bright and clear. Motion detected at Lake Tahoe front entry. My heart rate did not even jump. I grabbed my phone and opened my home security app. The live feed loaded perfectly. A beat-up rental sedan pulled into the driveway of my cabin. It is a fortress of glass and timber that I bought with my own hard-earned money. Thomas and Brenda stepped out into the mountain air, dragging garbage bags stuffed with the clothes Donovan had tossed out. Thomas walked up to the oak front door. Through the doorbell camera, I saw him pull a brass key from his coat. A wave of realization hit me. Years ago, when I closed on the house, I gave them a spare key. A foolish gesture from back when I thought they actually loved me. I had upgraded the keypads, but never changed that deadbolt. Thomas turned the key. The door swung open. My phone buzzed immediately with a warning. The security panel started a 30-second countdown to the siren. I watched the hallway camera to see his move. Thomas did not try to guess the code. He pulled a heavy metal wrench from his jacket. With a brutal swing, he smashed the digital panel right off the wall. Plastic shards flew everywhere. He ripped out the wiring, silencing the alarm before it could trigger. This was not a Munster danding. It was a calculated, violent break. Brenda followed, dragging trash bags across my custom rugs. She looked around the vaulted living room with zero shame. She had only greedy, entitled satisfaction. She dumped her bags on my white leather couch and headed for the kitchen. I switched the feed to the dining area and my climate-controlled wine fridge. 3,000 miles away in Chicago, I watched my mother hunt through my private collection. She skipped the standard bottles and grabbed a vintage Cabernet I had saved for major promotion. The bottle alone cost more than their motel bill. Brenda found a corkscrew, poured 2 giant glasses, and walked back to the living room. She handed one to Mark. My parents stood in my $1 million loft, clinking glasses in a celebratory toast. They were toasted to their own audacity, convinced they had already won. They knew exactly how the state laws worked once they established physical presence in a home. The legal power shifted. They were banking on the nightmare of squatter rights. In their minds, I was just their daughter. If I called the cops, they would claim they had permission. A simple family dispute. Officers hate domestic property calls. The police would call it a civil matter and refuse to boot them with a court-ordered eviction. That process takes months. During that time, they would live in luxury, draining my wine and trashes while I paid the utility bills. They thought I would be paralyzed by family guilt. They assumed I was still the old Sarah, the one who paid their mortgage just to keep the peace. They had no clue that woman was gone. I didn't scream. I just tapped record on my security app, capturing every second of the forced entry, the busted alarm panel, and their smug wine toast. I saved the footage to a secure server, timestamping every log's entry, showing the hardware destruction. I watched Brenda kick off her shoes and stretch out on my couch, treating my hard-earned home like a trophy. Their arrogance just fueled my resolve. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of real estate theft. They were trying to exploit property loopholes to force my hand. E closed the app and checked my contacts. Late, but I knew my lawyer was up. E dialed Mitchell's private line. It rang twice. I took a slow sip of wine, mirroring my mother's motion 3,000 miles away. The difference was, her glass was filled with stolen victory. Mine was filled with a ruinous strategy. They were about to learn that breaking in was the easy part. E dialed the local sheriff dispatch. I kept my voice clinical, reporting a forced entry and damaged security hardware at my vacation home. I gave the address and requested a burglary investigation. I did not mention the intruders were my parents. Legally, They were just unauthorized squatters who had smashed my gear. I kept the camera feed live. 20 minutes later, patrol lights reflect off my cabin windows. 2 deputies stepped out, flashlights cutting through the falling snow. Through the cameras, I watched their reaction. Brenda stiffened, setting her glass down on the island. She looked terrified, but Mark just adjusted his collar. He didn't look like a guy committing a felony. He looked prepared. He patted Brenda's shoulder and walked to the door, opening it before they could knock. "Good evening, officers," Marks. "Good evening," Off said, projecting the warm authority of a suburban patriarch. "Is there a problem?" The lead deputy kept his hand near his belt. "We got a break. In report, step outside and identify yourselves." Mark let out a sigh, stepping on the porch with empty hands. "Officer, sorry for the confusion. I am Mark, and this is my wife, Brenda. The owner is our daughter, Sarah. We just drove in from out of state, and there has been a terrible family misunderstanding." He gestured toward the broken alarm panel. "I am so embarrassed. The keypad was glitchy when we arrived. I tried to reset it and pulled the casing off. I am bad with tech. I will pay for it." "I pay for it." The deputy frowned and stepped inside. "The owner claims you have no authorization to be here. She reported a criminal trespass." Mark shook his head, wearing a look of profound paternal sadness. He reached in his jacket and pulled out a folder. I knew his game building the narrative. "My daughter and I recently had a business falling out," Mark explained smoothly, handing over the folder. "She is acting out of anger. But we are tenants. We have a verbal lease for the winter." I brought proof. I zoomed in. Mark was handing over fake papers. I knew exactly what they were. Total fraud. He printed a template, added our names, and attached receipts for random transfers he made to me last year. Those were repayments for his phone bill, which I paid on my corporate plan. But to a cop at 2 in the morning, they look like rent. The deputy reviewed the papers. He stepped back onto the porch. "Dispatch, get the owner on the line." My phone rang. I answered. "Ma'am," the deputy said, tone much less urgent. "The people inside claim to be your parents. They provided documents showing regular financial transfers and claim tenancy under a verbal lease. They have their belongings moved in. They are not tenants," I stated firmly. "The money was for a phone bill. They broke into my house and smashed my alarm system. I want them arrested." "I understand you are frustrated," the deputy replied, sounding like he was reading a script. "But they have established physical presence. They have clothes inside, keys to the door, and paperwork claiming a residency deal." "That paperwork is fake," I argued, knowing the grim reality. "They forced their way in. Whether the agreement is valid is for a judge," the deputy stated. "Under the law, once someone establishes residency and claims tenancy, we cannot arrest them for trespassing. We cannot remove them tonight. This is a civil dispute." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "You are telling me they can smash my property and you will leave them there?" My hands are tied. The law is strict on tenant protections. If you want them out, you need to file a formal eviction notice at the courthouse. I will document the damage in my report. But right now, they have a legal right to remain. Contact a real estate attorney in the morning." The deputy hung up. I sat there staring at the feed. The officers gave the folder back, tipped their hats, and walked to their cruisers. They drove away, leaving my parents standing victorious in my home. The lights faded into the snowy night. Mark locked the deadbolt and turned to Brenda. She let out a shrill laugh of relief, clapping her hands. Mark walked over to the island and picked up my vintage wine. Then he did exactly what I expected. He walked straight up to the living room camera. He knew I was watching. He knew the police had just given him a golden ticket to stay in my home for months while the courts processed the eviction. Mark stared into the lens. His face filled the screen. He raised his glass in a mocking toast. A triumphant smirk spread across his face. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and took a slow sip. The smirk on my father's face did not trigger rage. It inspired a cold, calculated clarity. He truly thought he had outsmarted me. He assumed his fake lease and suburban routine gave him an unbreakable shield. He figured I would spend bleeding cash on legal fees while they lived in my home. He had no idea what was coming. I didn't toss my phone or cry. I just grabbed my second line and called my lawyer. Grant is a shark big in real estate litigation and corporate defense. He picked up immediately. I laid out the break, in the busted alarm, the fake lease, and the cops refusing to act. Grant just chuckled. He told me Thomas was playing checkers while we were playing chess. Nevada tenant laws are tough, but they aren't bulletproof. Those laws vanish if a property becomes a health hazard. We didn't need an eviction. We needed an emergency. Grant had a ruthless plan. ID set up an anonymous Nevada LLC for taxes months ago. He told me to file a quitclaim deed transferring the house into that company right now. Once it was a corporate asset, the game changed. As the LLC manager, I could order emergency inspection. Grant had a contact at an environmental firm. They declared the place a biohazard due to toxic black mold in the vents and walls. Under state code, a biohazard must be cleared immediately. Better yet, to stop the spores. All utilities have to be cut by law. It completely skips tenant rights because it's a public health quarantine, not a landlord dispute. 2 days later, the trap was set. The house was under the LLC, and the mold notice was filed with the health department. I called the utility companies myself. With a verified biohazard mandate, they acted fast. Power cut, water valve locked, gas disabled. It was Tuesday night. A brutal winter storm was burying the Sierras in heavy snow. Outside, the temperature dropped to 50 degrees. I sat in my warm office, watching the backup cameras. Brenda and Thomas were clueless, sitting in the living room. At 6, the cabin went pitch black. Chandeliers died. The heat stopped. Thomas jumped up, flicking switches like a madman. Nothing. He stormed into the kitchen to check the taps. The pipes groaned, bone dry. Brenda huddled up as the mountain cold seeped through the glass. Thomas was on his phone, screaming at utility operators, his breath visible in the freezing air. They calmly told him the property was under a health quarantine. Panic hit him. He called the police, demanding they arrest the landlord for the shutoff. He thought that fake lease was a shield. 30 minutes later, those same deputies returned. Thomas ran on the snowy porch, shivering in a thin sweater, pointing at the dark house. The lead deputy checked his tablet and shook his head. He told my father the house was owned by an LLC and under a health department quarantine. The deputy delivered the final blow. Staying in a biohazard zone was a crime. If they didn't leave, they'd be arrested for violating a public health order. The fake lease was useless now. Brenda sobbed, grabbing her coat while the wind whipped snow across the porch. Thomas just stood there, his grand plan turning to dust. He tried to steal my home using the law, so I used the law to freeze him out. No leverage, no options. I watched on the feed as they packed trash bags in the dark. They slipped down the ice steps, dragging their bags to that beat-up rental car. They climbed in, desperately cranking the engine for heat. Headlights cut through the blizzard. I watched them back out and vanish into the Nevada night, homeless and defeated. I took a sip of wine and prepped the next phase. The day after they froze in that storm, I walked into Grant's Chicago office. Tahoe's the start, was just the start. My parents were ruined, but the main problem remained. Stephanie and Donovan were still living in the $800,000 house ID saved from auction. Hosting parties, playing the success story, living a lie. Time to destroy their reality. I sat across from Grant at his glass table. The Chicago River view was great, but I was focused on the manila folders between us. Grant looked sharp in his suit, waiting. He knew the drill. I didn't just want my sister and her husband out. I wanted to liquidate the asset. Sell it, take my equity, and leave them with nothing. Grant opened a folder, pushing his glasses up. He looked at me, calculating. Caroline, if we reforcing a partition sale, we need to prove your standing. Paying the mortgage for 6 years doesn't automatically make you an owner in the eyes of the state. I smiled, leaning back. My parents thought I was just the dutiful daughter paying their debts out of guilt. They were wrong. I'm a wealth management consultant. I manage risk and secure assets. I don't pour $250,000 into a sinking ship without taking the wheel. I tapped the thickest folder. Open the records from 6 years ago. Grant, look at the date when the bank was 60 days from foreclosure. Grant flipped through, his eyes scanning the fine print. He found the contract on heavy bond paper with a county seal. A slow grin spread across his face. 6 years ago, when Thomas and Brenda begged for a bailout, I gave them an ultimatum. I'd cover the past, due balance, the monthly $3,500, the taxes, and the repairs. But I demanded equity. I forced them to sign a deed adding my name to the title as a co-owner. No fine print here. I sat them with a lawyer and forced them to sign in blue ink. Desperate to hide their financial ruin, they signed away half their equity for my cash. Mitchell dropped the deed on the glass. You own 50% of this Chicago estate, Caroline. This is not a gentleman's agreement. It is cold, hard, registered law. Correct, I said, voice steady and sharp. Thomas and Brenda never owned that house alone, only half. The rest is mine. That is why their wedding announcement was a joke. Thomas stood before 300 people, gifting away a home that was mortgaged and co-owned by the daughter sitting in the back. Mitchell tapped his pen, eyes tracking the county database on his laptop. He searched the records for the Chicago property status. If you hold 50%, Caroline, we have a major problem. Troblin? Mitchell's tone turned urgent. He spun the laptop toward me. I leaned in, scanning the digital files. The history showed the very quitclaim deed my mother bragged about. It claimed the house was transferred entirely from my parents to Stephanie and Donovan. They were now the sole owners of an $800,000 estate. Legally impossible, I said, feeling a rush of adrenaline. A quitclaim deed only moves inch the grantor actually holds. They could transfer their half, but my 50%? That requires my notarized signature. I never signed it. Mitchell nodded, his face hardening. He clicked to download the actual filing from the county clerk. We watched the high-resolution document load on screen. We both leaned in to inspect the ink. There was my father's messy sprawl, my mother's elegant script, and my own signature on the line. It was black ink, bold and precise, a perfect imitation of my corporate style. I stared, cold realization setting in. I had never touched that document. I never authorized giving my sister and her scammer husband $250,000 in assets. The room went dead silent as I looked at Mitchell. The game had shifted. It was no longer a petty family drama over money. It was a coordinated criminal conspiracy. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I sat back, mind racing through the legal fallout. My previous wins were nothing compared to the storm I was about to rain down on them. Mitchell's screen lit the dark wood of the table. I leaned in again. My eyes traced the letters of my name. Terrifyingly accurate, but a fake. I pointed to the stroke. I never dragged the ink down, I flick it up. This is a forgery. Mitchell didn't blink, just zoomed in. Forging a birthday card is a family feud. Forging a deed to steal massive real estate, that is a profound escalation. My parents hadn't just lied to me. They committed a premeditated crime. They sat there, looked at a small fortune, and signed my name to steal my equity. They handed my blood and sweat to Stephanie just to play house. Mitchell adjusted his glasses. A signature is glasses. A signature alone is not enough. He warned. Law requires strict authentication. Someone had to verify you hand over your ID and signed it freely. He scrolled to the corner. A circular Breck stamp, a notary public. Mitchell read the name aloud and pulled up the state licensing database. Within 2 minutes, we had a hit. The notary ran a shop in a rundown strip mall, handling bail bonds and quick taxes. He was broke. He was the exact kind of guy Thomas could bribe with an envelope of cash. My father was a salesman. He knew how to talk to desperate people. He probably walked in, flashed some hundreds, and spun a lie about a busy daughter who couldn't make it in. Or maybe the notary just didn't care. Either way, he verified a ghost. I looked at Mitchell. What does this mean for prosecution? I needed to hear the full weight of the law. I wanted to measure the destruction heading their way. Mitchell folded his hands. We are looking at a federal indictment, Caroline. This is title fraud. By filing a forged deed, they committed perjury and public record fraud. By moving an asset worth nearly $1 million, they triggered wire fraud. The notary will lose his license and face prison. But your parents? He paused. They are looking at conspiracy to commit fraud and grand theft, high-level felonies. They aren't looking at probation. They are looking at a mandatory minimum of 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. 10 years. I let it sink in. A normal daughter might panic or cry for her aging parents. But I had been their financial shield for 6 years. I gave them every chance to live with honor. Instead, they chose felonies just so their golden child could live in luxury. They risked prison just to spite me. The betrayal severed the last thread of obligation. They weren't my parents anymore, they were thieves. I felt a surge of freedom. The gloves were off. We need to contact the county office, Mitchell said, reaching for the phone. We will file an affidavit of forgery, stop the transfer, and alert the FBI. We can reverse this by the end of the week. I placed my hand over his. Stop. Do not fight yet. Don't call the police. Mitchell stared, brow furrowed in confusion. This is a felony, Caroline. They stole your property. If we don't report it, they could leverage it. We need to lock the title before they cause more damage. I know what they'll do. Mitchell, that is why we wait. I walked to the window. Looking out at the city, I pictured Marcus in my home, playing the brilliant tech mogul. I thought about Chloe posting videos of her beautiful debt-free house. Consider who we are dealing with. I said, turning to my lawyer. Marcus is a fake CEO who needs cash for his made-up crypto schemes. Chloe is an influencer who spends fortunes to fake her success. They think they own an $800,000 estate free and clear. What does a scammer do with a massive unencumbered asset? He leverages it. Mitchell's eyes widened. He lowered the phone. You think he will take out a home equity loan? I guarantee it, I replied. He wants quick cash. He is going to walk into a bank, present that forged deed, and use my home as collateral for a massive loan. He wants to drain the equity dry. And if he does, Mitchell asked, a dark smile forming, he commits bank fraud. A much more serious federal crime. Exactly, I said, tapping the document. If we strike now, my parents face forgery charges. But Marcus and Chloe play the victims. They will claim they had no idea the deed was fake. They will beg the judge and walk free. But if we let Marcus take that fake deed to a bank and sign for a $500,000 loan, he becomes a federal criminal. He stops being a deadbeat and becomes a bank defrauder. I told Mitchell to quietly flag the title, not a lawsuit, but a silent tripwire in the National Registry. The moment a bank underwriter tried to finalize that loan, the system would alert us. We wouldn't just catch them stealing a house. We would catch them defrauding a major bank. We were letting their greed build their own gallows. I told Mitchell to prep the papers and keep his hand on the trigger. We were going to let Marcus walk in the bank and sign his own death warrant. I stepped out of the law firm in the biting Chicago wind. The cold air matched the chill in my veins. I climbed into my car, heading to my penthouse. I did not cry. The suffocating weight of parental betrayal was gone. Instead, my mind began a cold audit of the last 6 years. I leaned back, tracing the timeline. 6 years ago, my parents sat on my couch weeping, begging for help to stop a foreclosure. I remembered my mother's desperation, my father's shaking hands. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. They signed a deed giving me 50% equity, full of math, finally relief. Now the math finally made sense. They never saw that signature as a binding contract. To them, my name on the deed was just a temporary hurdle, a small price for a permanent ATM. I thought of Chloe, about world. Since birth, she was the center of their world. She had the charm and lack of accountability they loved. She played the perfect dependent, letting them feel essential. I was too independent and analytical. My success was an insult to their failures. They resented my wealth but felt entitled to consume it. They saw my income not as the result of my 80-hour work weeks, but as a family resource to be harvested for Chloe. Then came Marcus, when Chloe brought him home in his rented suits, pitching his hollow crypto startup. My parents were captivated. He spoke their language of unearned luxury. They wanted to be part of the billionaire narrative he spun. But Marcus had no capital. He needed a stage. He needed physical proof of wealth to sell his fraudulent empire. My parents knew their decaying finances would expose them to this golden son in law, so they plotted to secure the ultimate prop. The premeditation of the forgery killed my last bit of empathy. This wasn't a panic move. This was a calculate conspiracy. They researched how to bypass a co-owner. They found a corrupt notary in a strip mall. They sat at a table and carefully mimicked my signature. They practiced stealing from me. They committed a felony with steady hands, sure that my loyalty would keep me from reporting them. They weaponized my love. I became a beast of burden, dragging their liability while they paraded Marcus and Chloe in a golden carriage. For 6 years, every transfer of $3,500 was me funding my own robbery. I was maintaining the credit score they needed to execute this theft. Sitting in the car, I felt my perspective shift. The programming that says you must forgive your parents evaporated, leaving a sharp, empty void. Brenda and Thomas were no longer my parents. They were hostile liabilities. Chloe and Marcus were not family. They were squatters holding stolen assets. I am a wealth executive who dismantles toxic structures and liquidates bad investments. I destroy parasites for a living. It was time to bring that expertise home. No more confronting them. No more demands for apologies. Explanations are for people who want to fix relationships. I only cared about recovery and maximum damage. They chose to play a high-stakes game of real estate fraud to fund a fake life. I was going to let them play. I would let them walk into the casino, put all their stolen chips on the table, and then I would lock the doors and burn the place down. The car arrived at my tower. I felt lighter and more dangerous than ever. By the time I reached my penthouse, the plan was solid. I wouldn't say a word to them. I would watch them bask in their stolen glory and wait for Marcus's greed to trigger my trap. A thief never stops at one crime. They always reach for more, and I would make sure his next reach was his last. I returned to Mitchell's office at 8 sharp. The Chicago skyline was gray, but the lights in the conference room were blinding. Mitchell had the paperwork ready. He had drafted a formal complaint for the state attorney, detailing the forgery, the corrupt notary, and the illegal transfer. Mitchell held his phone, ready to call the fraud unit. "Caroline, warrants could be issued by tomorrow," he insisted. The prosecutor would love this clear-cut case of property theft. Thomas and Brenda would be arrested, and the transfer voided. I pushed the papers back, my voice cold. "Shred it. No police, no lawyers, no alerts." Mitchell stared at me, eyes wide. He adjusted his glasses, looking from the FI to my face. "Caroline, they stole $250,000, he stammered. "We must report this before they sell the state." I shook my head. "They won't sell. Selling takes time. Stephanie is busy filming house tours for followers, playing the young wealthy homeowner. Donovan is playing the startup founder. They are blinded by their own fake success. But that success is expensive, too fake." I leaned in, resting my elbows on the cold glass. "Think about Donovan. He is a smooth scammer pushing a fake crypto scheme. No revenue, no funding. He is surviving on credit cards and my parents' charity. He is desperate for cash to keep this charade alive. And now, he thinks he owns an $800,000 property free and clear." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. A con artist with a free asset? He won't just sit on it. He will leverage it. He is going to walk into bank, present that forged deed, and beg for a massive loan. He wants hundreds of thousands in cash for his phantom company and luxury cars. If we arrest my parents now, they take the fall. Stephanie plays the victim, and Donovan walks away clean. I want to walk. I want Donovan to sign his name on a federal application. Mitchell leaned back, reeling the trap. If Donovan used a forged deed for a bank loan, he commits federal fraud. He triggers an FBI investigation. "Exactly," I said. "But we need a safety net." He instructed Mitchell to file a quiet cloud on title, a formal notice of an ownership dispute, no public lawsuit, just a discreet red flag buried in the county registry. It would be invisible to anyone checking standard records. Stephanie could keep posting, and Donovan could play the CO, never knowing the landmine was waiting. But the moment he sat down with a bank underwriter, they would run a deep title search. The system would hit our dispute. The bank would instantly flag the collateral as fraudulent. Mitchell picked up his gold pen, a sharp smile forming. "You want to wait for him to trigger a federal transaction. The moment the bank flags it, we hand our evidence to the feds." I nodded. "Let them think they won. Let Donovan dream of that cash injection. We stay silent and wait for the prey to walk in the trap." Mitchell began drafting the notice. The board was set. The pieces were locked. I felt calm. I went home, poured coffee, and checked an anonymous account. Stephanie was posting from the kitchen, planning renovations. Donovan was in the living room, loudly pitching his fake crypto project. They looked so happy, so invincible. They had no idea they were dancing on a legal graveyard. I closed the laptop and took a sip of coffee. Just wait. The trap was armed, and Donovan's greed would do the rest. 3 weeks passed. The wedding euphoria faded, replaced by the reality of maintaining an $800,000 estate. Heating a sprawling home in winter is expensive. Maintenance and appearances were draining their cash. More importantly, Donovan was running out of time. A fake tech CEO cannot survive without fresh capital. I watched their lives through my tablet while sipping espresso. Stephanie documented every moment, bragging to followers about being debt-free. She filmed Donovan at my father's desk, wearing a turtleneck, shouting in his phone about blockchain and finance. It was a perfect performance. But behind the lens, the desperation was becoming obvious. Donovan had no venture capital. His startup was just a landing page. He needed cash to fund his lie. He could not attract investors if he could not pay for dinner. He needed a prop to sell his billionaire persona, a new Porsche Macan, and a massive cash infusion to keep his scam floating. I knew his type. I had taken down dozens of fakes just like him. When a con artist is cornered, they do not back down, they double down. Donovan held what he thought was his trump card, $800,000 in equity. I listened to Stephanie's live stream. He was a master manipulator. He did not tell her they were broke. He framed his cash grab as a brilliant business move. I heard him pacing, feeding her the buzzwords he learned online. He told her that keeping money in a house was dead equity. He convinced her that wealthy people leverage assets. He claimed a home equity loan would extract $500,000 in untaxed cash. He pitched it as a power move, promising to dump it in his crypto platform and multiply it tenfold. To look the part of a tech titan, he insisted on buying a fully loaded Porsche Macan. He pitched a $90,000 SUV as a business expense. Stephanie bought it. She had zero financial sense, protected from debt by our parents and my mortgage payments. She didn't grasp interest rates or the danger of leveraging a home for a fake startup. She just saw $500,000 cash and a Porsche. Her social media soon filled with pure delusion. She posted mood boards of luxury interiors and hinted at a massive venture capital deal. She bragged that her husband was disrupting fintech. She was addicted to the idea of being a Silicon Valley power wife. Fueled by Donovan's greed, they skipped local banks, wanting the prestige of a major Chicago institution. He walked in, ready to slap that forged deed on a desk and demand $500,000. I watched her video. She sat in their car, tapping her nails against a folder, giggling about their executive meeting and their massive upgrade. Donovan sat beside her in a sharp navy suit, flashing a smug, arrogant smile. He looked like a man who thought he had outsmarted the world. He truly believed he had stolen my house and humiliated everyone in one clean sweep. I locked my tablet, a cold smile forming. They were driving to the bank with a fake paper from a crooked notary, sure of their payday. They had no clue a federal tripwire was waiting the second they handed over that folder. The trap was set. The legal system was about to snap. Mitchell poured 2 coffees in his office, calm and ready. He handed me a cup. We sat in his room overlooking the Chicago skyline. On his monitor, a legal portal tracked deed registries in real time. We weren't guessing. We were watching the gears turn. The Chicago estate file just updated. A bank had officially started underwriting a $500,000 line of credit. Donovan had actually done it. He used that forged deed to apply for $500,000 in equity he didn't own. I checked my phone. Stephanie was broadcasting their genius to the internet. She uploaded a 20-minute video from a Porsche dealership, running her hands over the leather and flashing her diamond rings at the camera. She declared that when you marry a tech visionary, you never have to wait. She stared at the lens, dripping with condescension. "I don't understand people in cubicles," she said, leaning back. "People working 80 hours a week for a paycheck. It is a sad, limited life. No freedom, no vision. You have to be smart. You need to make your money work by leveraging assets, not being a wage earner." She was mocking me, mocking the exact career that paid for her roof for 6 years. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle. Mitchell shook his head in disbelief as she showed off the car trim. "The arrogance is staggering," he muttered. "They are actively documenting their own crimes, leaving a trail of intent." "Let her talk," I replied, setting my own face down. "Every video establishes a timeline. It proves they are willing participants in fraud. They cannot claim ignorance. They are eager beneficiary of a criminal conspiracy." I looked back at the monitor. The application was moving fast. Federal underwriting is brutal. A bank doesn't hand over $500,000 just because a guy in a suit uses buzzwords. They verify everything. They accepted the initial application. Now came the automated valuation to confirm the estate was worth $800,000. A green light flashed. The algorithm confirmed it. Donovan must have fabricated revenue projections to prove he could pay. The bank bought his fraudulent income statements. They accepted the history I paid for, now tied to his name. "The initial review is done," Mitchell noted, pointing at the screen. It moved to the title department. They are initiating a deep background search. I watched the bar move. They were digging into records, liens, and the chain of custody. Stephanie uploaded another story from the Chicago estate kitchen. She was unboxing Crystal, announcing a housewarming party for the launch of Donovan's platform. "We are celebrating our gorgeous new home," she chirped. Big things were coming, just not the kind she expected. I set my mug down. The trap held. They were so blinded by fake success they ignored banking reality. When a federal bank issues a loan, they use title examiners who don't just glance at a paper from a corrupt notary. They pull the entire file, checking every signature and legal dispute. Mitchell and I watched in silence. The banking software was a cold, emotionless machine. It didn't care about her aesthetic or his fake persona. It only cared about risk, and that house was a massive red flag. The legal cloud I buried in the registry sat waiting. Bank examiners were already pulling files. It was only a matter of time before their automated system hit my hidden tripwire. I smiled. The downfall would be flawless. It was Thursday, 2 days my sister's massive, overs. Hyped party. Time was up. Donovan needed that $500,000 loan to cover the catering, the bar, and his flashy new sports car. He sat in the law office with herbal tea. Mitchell monitored the National Registry while I watched Stephanie's feed. She and Donovan were at a downtown bank, surrounded by legal papers. She posted a photo bragging about securing the bag and living the ultimate executive wife life. I zoomed in on her high-res shot. I could clearly see Donovan signing the federal lending agreement. He was binding him to a $500,000 home equity loan. He using property he did not own to swindle a bank. He is signing the final disclosures, I said, my voice sharp in the room. Mitchell leaned in, eyes glued to the tracking software. The portal refreshed every 30 seconds. Once the ink dries, the agent scans the packet for final approval, he explained. Before the cash hits his account, the automated system runs one final verification. They have to catch any hidden disputes from the last month. We watched the screen. The tension was electric. It felt like watching a predator walk right onto landmine. 10 minutes passed. Stephanie posted a video of Donovan shaking hands with an executive. They thought they had one. Then, the monitor flashed red. A harsh warning code filled the screen. The bank's algorithm hit my wall. It bypassed the tax records my parents faked and collided with the title dispute I buried weeks ago. "There it is," Mitchell whispered. The bank flagged the collateral. "The wire transfer is frozen." The system rejected the money. They were probably walking out of the lobby right now, clueless that their funding was never coming. The bank's fraud unit was getting alerts, but I wasn't leaving this to some corporate investigator. I wanted the full weight of the federal government. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick, organized dossier. I had spent weeks compiling evidence. It had my original deed showing I owned half the estate and the forged quitclaim deed my father used to steal it. It included records of my mortgage payments and Stephanie's videos where Donovan admitted he was stealing the property to fund his crypto startup. Now, the bank's rejection was the final piece of the puzzle. We had proof of attempted bank fraud. I slid the file to my attorney. "Send it," I ordered. Mitchell had a direct line to a high-ranking contact at the federal field office. He worked with a special agent focused on financial crime and real estate theft. Mitchell attached the digital rejection code to our criminal complaint. He typed a technical email detailing the interconnected crimes. He outlined the fraud conspiracy led by my parents, the aggravated identity theft from the forged signature, and the attempted wire fraud for $500,000. He detailed the bank fraud committed when Donovan signed that loan application using a stolen house as collateral. Mitchell clicked send. The email flew through encrypted servers straight to the feds. I stood by the window looking at the city. The sky was gray, but I felt brilliant. The trap snapped shut perfectly. There was no backing out now. No family excuses, no gaslighting, and no escaping the consequences. Once federal agents open a case, it leaves the victim's hands. The Department of Justice takes over. My parents couldn't beg me to stop because I was just a witness providing the facts. Donovan wanted to play the high-rolling tech mogul. My parents wanted to be the generous elite. Stephanie wanted to be the untouchable influencer. They built a world of lies on my stolen equity. Now the government was about to arrest the cast. The agent just confirmed receipt. Mitchell said, sus, breaking the silence. He scanned a reply on his monitor. They are reviewing the file now. Given the severity of the bank fraud, he expects to secure federal warrants within 48 hours. 48 hours. That meant the strike teams would arrive right in the middle of their party. They invited everyone: the country club crowd, the fake business contacts, the superficial influencer friends. They planned a celebration of stolen wealth. He watched my reflection in the window and felt a chilling peace. It would be the most memorable party our family ever held. I couldn't wait to watch their empire burn. Friday was bitter and cold, but inside the luxury boutiques, the atmosphere was arrogant. I sat in my penthouse monitoring the logs while watching Stephanie broxt her shopping spree. They were convinced $500,000 was currently hitting their account. Donovan planned a victory lap. He and Stephanie stood in an exclusive watch boutique. The camera captured the velvet trays and champagne. Stephanie panned across diamond watches, asking followers to help pick a gift for her tech husband. Julian stood by her in a sharp suit, adjusting his cuffs with the smug air of a man who thought he had finally made it. They were burning through credit cards they could not pay off, betting everything on a massive bank transfer that had yet to hit. It was the classic blunder of every amateur fraudster. They always spend the loot before the deal is even signed. Back in my office, my secure app chimed. A short, encrypted text from Mitchell. Just 2 sentences. The wire is moving. The federal hold kicked in. The $500,000 payment had officially left the reserve. For a split second, the money hit Julian S. business account. The balance looked massive, life-changing. But before his phone could even chirp a notification, the federal freeze slammed down like a vault door. The feds had locked every cent. Every linked account and credit line under Julian S.'s name went dead instantly. The cash was now evidence in a federal investigation. It was stuck in digital limbo, gone. I pulled up the live feed. Stephanie was wrapping up, bragging that Julian had made his pick. He was buying a rose gold chronograph that cost more than most folks earn in 2 years. He kissed her cheek, grinning for the camera, rambling about hard work and genius investments. Then the feed cut. I knew exactly what was coming next. I had seen this play out dozens of times when seizing assets from shady companies. Julian would have confidently hand his metal card to the store manager. The manager would swipe that heavy card, chatting about the party, and then the terminal would beep. A sharp, ugly rejection. I could see Julian S.'s face tighten. He would chuckle, blaming some routine bank glitch for blocking his big purchase. He would reach in his wallet for a backup debit card, the one linked to his fake fortune. The manager would swipe that one too. Another beep. Declined. Contact the bank. The store's polite vibe would vanish, replaced by thick, suffocating silence. The clerks would exchange looks. Stephanie S.'s smile would crumble, her face burning with humiliation. Julian is a man who builds his whole ego on money. Being rejected in front of his wife and a team of sales staff would feel like a punch to the gut. He would pull out his phone, his fingers flying, trying to show the manager that his accounts were still full of cash. When the app loaded, he would not see a balance, just a generic error telling him to call fraud support immediately. I sat in my quiet living room, savoring the poetic justice. Julian was standing in a high-end store with a watch he could not afford. Realizing his financial house of cards had just collapsed, he would walk out empty-handed, the complimentary champagne tasting like bile. He would spend hours in his leased car screaming at bank drones who would tell him absolutely nothing. Federal rules stop bank staff from tipping off suspects when the feds are involved. The operators would just read from a script, claiming the account was under review. The panic would sink in. He had caterers to pay by morning, a luxury car dealer expecting a wire by noon. He had a sprawling estate to keep up, and he could not even afford a tank of gas. The walls of his scam were closing in, squeezing the air right out of his lungs. He would probably call my parents, desperate to know if there was a problem with the deed they signed over. Thomas and Brenda would tell him everything was fine, totally clueless that their forged signatures had triggered a federal trap. They would all sit in their bubble of denial, blaming bureaucratic delays, blind to the federal agent closing in. Tomorrow was Saturday, the night of their big housewarming bash. They were going to open my house to hundreds of guests. pretending they were Chicago royalty, hiding their panic behind cheap wine. They had no idea the guest list had grown. The caterers and influencers weren't the only ones showing up. I closed my laptop, a deep calm settling over me. I had a dress to pick out. It was going to be one hell of a party. Saturday night hit the Chicago suburbs with a sharp frost. But the estate was glowing with blinding light. Valets in crisp vests sprinted around, parking a sea of luxury cars. I watched from the dark of a hired town car. Stephanie and Donovan had blown a fortune on this gala. A string quartet played, their notes drifting out whenever the heavy door swung open. My parents were loving it. Through the bay windows, I saw Thomas laughing with the board members, drink in hand. Brenda was floating through the crowd, wearing a sequin gown and showing off the house as if she built it herself. Stephanie was holding by the stairs, Liv streaming to her followers. Julian, though, looked like he was standing on a trap door. He kept checking his phone, pacing by the kitchen, his smile tight. The fact that his accounts were locked was clearly killing him. He was surrounded by wealth he could not afford, praying for a weekend miracle. He was not getting a miracle. He was getting me. I checked my watch. Right on time, 4 unmarked black SUVs pulled on the street, moving with synchronized predatory speed. They blew past the valet and parked right on the lawn. Doors flew open. I stepped out of the town car, the cold wind whipping my coat. I didn't come alone. Behind me stood the county sheriff and 6 federal agents in tactical gear with FBI print across their backs. We marched up the stone steps. No knocking, I shoved the double doors open. The shift from the freezing night to the warm, crowded foyer was jarring. The quartet was right by the door. When the agent stormed in, the cellist faltered. The music died in a discordant crash. The silence hit the house like a shockwave. Over 100 people froze, staring at the door. Stephanie saw me first. Her eyes lit up with pure rage. She handed her phone to a bridesmaid and marched over, her silk gown swishing angrily. "Caroline, what are you doing here?" Stephanie demanded, her voice cutting through the dead silence. "You are not invited. Get out of my house right now before I call security." I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I just took a step aside to clear the way. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, his badge clipped to his belt. His face was like stone. He looked past Stephanie, ignoring her outburst, and locked eyes on the 2 older figures frozen by the fireplace, Thomas and Brenda. My father dropped his glass. It shattered, spilling amber liquid across the hearth. Mom gasped, clutching her chest. They recognized the jackets. They recognized the federal agents walking right toward them. The lead officer boomed, his voice echoing with cold authority. "Step away from the crowd and keep your hands where I can see them." Guests scrambled back, parting like the Red Sea, desperate to dodge the unfolding disaster. Whispers rippled through the room as agents formed a tactical circle around my parents. "Officer, what is the meaning of this?" Dad tried to sound arrogant, but his voice cracked. "This is a private home. You cannot just barge in here. You are under arrest by order of the Department of Justice," the agent stated, pulling heavy steel cuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. "You are charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aggravated identity theft." Mom started hyperventilating, her knees buckling. She reached for Dad, but an agent grabbed her wrist, pinning her arms behind her back. "This is a mistake!" Mom shrieked, her country club persona shattering. "We did not steal anything. It is our house. We gave it to our daughter." "Caroline, tell them. Tell them it is a misunderstanding." I stood still, hands in my pockets, staring her down. I let the coldness in my eyes freeze her breath. "You bribed a corrupt notary to forge my signature on a deed," I said, my voice cutting through the silent room. "You transferred the house into your daughter's name and committed a federal felony. The notary confessed to the FBI an hour ago. He handed over footage of you paying him cash." The crowd gasped. The wealthy socialites who'd just been praising Mom were now staring in pure disgust. Donovan pushed through, his face pale and dripping with sweat. "Wait," he stammered, holding his hands up. "We had nothing to do with this. Stephanie and I just got the deed as a gift. We had no idea it was forged." The agent turned to him. "Interesting defense. It might have worked if you had not taken that fake deed to a bank 2 days ago to secure a $500,000 loan." Donovan's jaw dropped. The reality hit him like a wrecking ball. The frozen accounts, the declined cards, it was not a glitch, it was a federal sting. You committed bank fraud, the agent said, signaling deputies. That is a separate crime. Your accounts are seized. Stephanie let out a piercing scream. She collapsed to her knees, ruining her dress, sobbing as agents cuffed her husband. Donovan did not fight. He looked hollow, staring at the floor as his fake tech business vanished into thin air. Mom wept, mascara running down her face as they marched her out. Dad hung his head in shame, refusing to look at the friends he had spent his life trying to impress. They were paraded past me. The flashing police lights caught their humiliated faces. I did not flinch. I watched them load the people who betrayed me in the vans. The party was over. The estate was mine again, and their reign of manipulation was finally over. The lights faded in the cold Chicago night, leaving the house quiet. The guests had fled the moment they saw the handcuffs, treating the party like a sinking ship. Only Stephanie remained. She was kneeling on the hardwood foyer, her silk gown stained with champagne and running makeup. She looked up, her face twisted in terror. "Caroline, you cannot do this," she sobbed, clutching the banister. "Where am I supposed to go? Mom and Dad are arrested. This is my house." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. "It is not your house, Stephanie. It never was." I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent one text. Within a minute, an armored van pulled into the drive. 4 private security contractors in tactical gear stepped out and marched through the front doors. I had kept my security team on standby for this very moment. "Clear the property," I instructed, my voice level. "She has 10 minutes to grab her essentials. Everything else goes." Stephanie screamed as the team marched past her. They marched upstairs and hauled heavy bags filled with her designer shoes and makeup. They did not pack carefully. They dragged the bags down the stairs and hurled them out onto the frozen lawn. "You are a monster!" Stephanie shrieked as a guard grabbed her arm and led her out. "You are destroying your family!" I watched her stumble into the wind. Shivering in her ruined gown, she fell into the snow, surrounded by bags of the fake life she built on my dime. I shut the oak doors, locking them tight. The house was finally silent. The rot was gone. 6 months later, the federal system moved with crushing speed, destroying the people who tried to ruin me. The bank voided the $500,000 loan the moment the FBI confirmed the fraud. They went further too, filing a massive civil suit against Donovan, compounding his criminal charges. The fake startup executive was exposed as a fraud with zero revenue and a history of debt. Facing the evidence, including bank records and the notary's confession, Donovan was denied bail. He is sitting in a federal detention center awaiting trial for bank and wire fraud. He is facing a long sentence that will cost him his best years. My parents fared no better. Thomas and Brenda were indicted on multiple felonies. They tried to hire a high-priced lawyer, but without my silent financial backing, their resources evaporated. They were forced to liquidate their entire retirement savings just to cover the legal fees. It did not save them. The federal evidence was simply too overwhelming to fight. They are both serving time in a federal prison, stripped of their status and their fake wealth. Stephanie filed for divorce the second Donovan was indicted, trying to distance herself from the fallout. But the damage was done. Without Donovan's fake income and my stolen equity, she was left holding the bag for massive credit card debts they used to fund their image. The designer clothes, the wedding upgrades, and the luxury cars all came crashing down on her at once. She is working a minimum wage job now, drowning in collections and living in a tiny apartment far from the suburbs she once ruled. As for the Chicago estate, the court quickly nullified the forged deed. Ownership was restored to me in weeks. I did not keep the house. It held too many toxic memories. I listed it during a regional housing shortage. Because I had kept it in pristine condition, it sparked a brutal bidding war. I sold the place for $950,000 cash. I dumped that profit into a safe bond portfolio, locking into my freedom forever. Standing on the deck of my Seattle lake house, the winter slush was gone. Everything was bright. Crisp mountain spring. Sunlight danced off the water, stretching forever. The air tasted perfect. I sipped a glass of vintage champagne, savoring the taste of total victory. I had not spoken to my relatives since I bolted the doors of that old Chicago house for good. I blocked their calls, tossed their desperate jailhouse letters, and scrubbed them from my life. I leaned on the railing, soaking up the sun. I had protected my money, held my ground, and legally crushed the vultures trying to drain me. I was finally free, loaded, and most of all at peace. I toasted the mountain standing tall against the sky. Family is not just blood. Family is people who do not forge your name. The chilling story of Sarah is a masterclass in setting boundaries and keeping your peace. The lesson is clear. Sharing DNA does not give anyone a free pass to steal from you. Society tells us family is forever, no matter the toxicity. But Sarah broke that myth. Proving blind loyalty is just a weapon for those who see you as a bank account. Her win was not just beating a fraud investigation. It was reclaiming self. She proved that financial independence is power. When you control your own assets, you take away their leverage. True strength is not screaming for apologies from people who feel no remorse. True power is cold, calculated distance. You do not owe peace to people plotting your downfall. Sometimes. Self-love means stepping back and letting them face the wreckage of their own mistakes. You never need to set yourselves on fire to keep them warm. Real family is built on respect and honesty, not greed. Walking away from toxic relatives is not a tragedy, it is a win. If this story helped you set better boundaries, hit the like button, subscribe, and tell me your own story of breaking free in the comments.